So I'll introduce our first speaker, Professor Stephanie Watson. Professor Stephanie Watson is a cornea surgeon known for her groundbreaking research in cornea therapies. She leads the cornea research group at University of Sydney and is head of the cornea unit at the Sydney Eye Hospital. She has made significant contributions to policy and advocacy. She's the chair of Ophthalmic Research Institute of Australia, chair to the Association for Research in Vision and Ophthalmology's Advocacy and Outreach Committee. Her practice is in cornea and cataract surgery in adults and children, with appointments at the Sydney Children's and Prince of Wales Hospital, where she is a Rensical trainer. She has over 215 publications, is invited to speak internationally. Professor Watson was the only Australian to make the power list of the top 100 women in ophthalmology in 2021. It is our pleasure to have Stephanie to share her advices on how to write a good NHMRC grant. Thank you, and over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Preferences. So I'm just getting my talk up. I've just got a new computer and I just figured what was stopping me sharing it the other day is the security setting. But to get past the security setting, I've got to quit and reopen Zoom. I just emailed the slides to him. I don't know whether you've got them.
Let me try to share them.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, otherwise I've got to leave the meeting, I believe, to get my, oh no, here they are. Sorry, they're up. It's good. Share. Okay. Okay, so now I think I just have to go back to put it into the slideshow. Okay, so there we go. Can everybody see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So look, first of all, getting started, you know, where do you start when you're thinking of writing a grant? Well, the first thing is to, you know, review your research work and to see, oh, it hasn't gone to the next page.
I think I'm sharing the slides now.
Oh, you're sharing,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good, sorry. Next time it'll be all sorted. So it's to review your research work. So every time you write a paper or if you've written your treatise, and when you get to the end of that paper, you talk about what you need to do next. And that's really where there are a lot of ideas for your next research grant. Also, you know, reading journals and thinking about who you might collaborate with. A lot of grants these days require more than just yourself to show that you have sufficient track record or expertise to complete the project. So who would be your likely collaborators? Next slide, please. Now, this is some of the grants that are coming up, which you may be aware of, and the investigator grants, they're going to be due in March next year. But it's quite a bit of work to put one together. So the sooner you can start thinking about it, particularly in terms of your track record, the better. And if as part of that investigator grant, you might have an idea, and that's where it's more around a project than yourself. And it's slightly later than the investigator grant, but it's hard to put both an investigator and an ideas grant together. So you may want to choose to focus on one or the other. And synergy grants are sort of with a larger team. And so at an ECR level, you may not be putting one of these together. Development grants, sometimes people will have an ideas grant and also try to see if they can put in a development grant. But development grant is really more about getting a product into commercialization than it is about investigating an idea. So it's probably important to, you know, have a look at the guidelines and think about whether your project's going to be suitable. Clinical trial grants, probably not going to be putting those in. And the other thing to note is the investigator grants for 2023 will come around sooner than the ones this year. So you'll need to, you know, once you've finished in March, you're probably going to have another 6 months if you want to think about putting another one in. Next slide, please. So I did a grant writing course with the university a couple of years ago, and it was really very good. And it sort of gave a basic structure around how to sort of set up any grant. but it is suitable for these types of grants from the NHMRC, because all of them require you to explain clearly what you're going to do and who you are. So this is the format system, and it's been suggested as a way for framing your grant application. So the first of all is to determine a why. The second, explain the what and the how, and then to come back to what if, which is a little bit like the why. Next slide, please. So the why is sort of the introduction bit, and this is important because it needs to talk about why your topic matters and why it needs to be addressed now. So this is where you really make the case for your grant, and why continuing with how things are is not good enough, and what are the benefits be from doing what you're proposing. And, you know, how much why? Well, you know, if it's a presentation, it's at least the first 3 to 5 minutes. For a grant in a 100-word abstract, you probably want about 20 to 30 words. And for most of the NHMRC grants, you have to put together a synopsis of about this size. And so this can give you an idea of how much why you should have for that. In an introduction to a grant, you're going to need at least the first and probably the second paragraph to establish your why. Next slide, please. Now, this is just some examples to show different ways of framing your why, but it's important to really sort of try to make it sound engaging for the reader. So if you read this one here, this is a very sort of statement of fact. You know, my PhD focused on the potentially deadly, can't even say it, melioidosis, an infectious disease caused by a gram-negative bacterium. My work gave the first demonstration of how the bacterium protected against inhalational disease in mice, and the achievement opens doors for the development of a vaccine, you know, which all sounds very reasonable. But next slide. Next slide. So, but it's probably, go back one slide. But it's probably not the most compelling argument for the why. It's more factual. So we need to engage people. Next slide. So this is an example of how you could write a why that's a bit more engaging. So melioidosis, a potentially deadly disease caused by a bacterium found in soil and water, is a global problem and costs the Australian healthcare system more than 20 million. So just in that one sentence, you really made a much bigger case for why your project is important. Gaining a better understanding of how other bacteria could protect us against melioidosis infection will aid the development of a long-sought vaccine. So not just vaccine, it's a long sought-after vaccine. And this means reducing common side effects of melioidosis, as well as reducing financial strain on the healthcare system through preventative vaccination of high-risk populations. My proposed fellowship project will research the bacterium, which has shown promise as a potential vaccine candidate. So similar sort of, you know, both are saying what you're going to do, but this example too is more compelling. So if we go to the next slide. So the ways to sort of build your why and to increase how compelling it is to make it a bit more personable. So you can have quotes, make sure you've got statistics and facts, so numbers to back up what you say. So if you say it's expensive to the health system, it's always more engaging if you might say, look, 20 million, 30 million, you know, pose questions to the audience to get them thinking, and talk about the potential benefits and also about the costs of not doing your project. You know, what will be the harm done to people, the health system, the costs through not achieving it. Next slide, please. This is another way of building the why. This is called the Milton Hand, and it's used to make persuasive arguments with what's called normative claims. And normative claims are claims that are saying, look, this is what we ought to do, what we need to do, which was the second example, as opposed to descriptive claims where you're sort of just saying, well, this is, you know, sort of what's happening. So, you know, so as part of a normative claim, you might say, if we do this, then this will happen because it's super important. It makes a lot of sense to do this, and it means that people aren't going to lose sight, you know, or the negative version of that, which is the hand on the other side. Next slide. So here's just a little bit more about these normative claims. So it's a value-based claim that says, look, this should happen, and it's different to a descriptive claim. And these are the sort of claims you should be looking to make. Next slide. So then we move on to the what. So this should be short and succinct, and it serves to define your topic and title. And it may provide some brief background or history to the content of the application. So this is where you get more into the nitty-gritty of saying, well, my problem is this. And if you're going to use any terms throughout the grant, particularly, you know, abbreviations or things that might not be easily understood. And for investigator grants, remember that it may not be an I person that is assessing your grant. It may be a general person. So if you're going to start talking in detail about the I, you might need to explain it here and provide some background. And for your synopsis, maybe a sentence, a bit longer in a speech. Next slide, please. And then the how. So this is the actual walkthrough of your project that you're proposing. This is actually how you're going to do it. And each little section of this, if you're going to have more than one aim, should be a mini sort of why, what, how, what if, you know, a version of the initial, of the format system. Again, this will vary as to how many, how big the application is, but in a synopsis, maybe 50 words. And here, the challenge is not to get lost in the technical detail, which apparently is the cardinal sin of academic communication, because the marker will get lost. And that could be a person reading your grant, you know, at 10 p.m. at night after having spent a busy day doing their own research or, you know, seeing patients in a clinic. And so it has to be clear and not overly technical. And bring in a small why for each step of the how. And you know, why you're going to do the steps and why it's important. And then also pull it together with how it's going to contribute to your big picture. Next slide, please. And then we have the what if. And this is a little bit like the why, because you're coming back full circle, but you're bringing everything together from the how, from the what's and the hows, and addressing any existing or potential questions. Provide anything that, you know, that's really extra compelling that might make the audience more persuaded to what you're saying, and look into the future to see how useful your work will be. Address the implications and applications of your work. So a bit more detail than what you've said at the beginning in the why. This is sort of a bit more practical. And maybe you might have one sentence in a 100-word abstract. And you want to finish by circling back to significance. And so the why is focused on the significance of the problem you're going to address, and therefore focuses on the past and present. The what if is focused on the significance of your proposed solution and is therefore future orientated. So what is going to be happening next after you've completed the successful grant project. Next slide. Yeah, so example, so a good what if doesn't say, my hypothesis is right and will cure cancer. I was on the, wasn't Investigative, it was before the ideas grants, the NHMRC project grant committees. And it was common for most applicants to finish by saying, you know, something like this, all cancer will be cured, or, but, you know, you have to be more, a little bit more specific and make it sound a bit more compelling. For example, we must now capitalize on our promising pilot data. So it puts that sense of urgency in there. It talks up your pilot data to ascertain whether X could be a new target in combating cancer. So now remember, it's a bit of a tightrope. You have to walk between sounding, you know, too confident, but not confident enough. But you do have to make claims that talk up your potential success. Next slide. So finally, just some tips. So try to minimize the use of acronyms and jargon. I think also too many abbreviations can make it confusing and hard to read. But if you do need to use them, explain them. In your track record, explain the importance of field-specific journals and conferences. But this is important for investigator grants that they may not even know who ARVO is, the people looking at that. So I always say ARVO, the world's most respected and largest eye organization or some eye research organization. And when describing your research findings in your track record sections, make sure you clearly explain why they're significant for the field. Don't assume the assessors will know. Similarly, in your research proposal, make it clear why you want to do a certain piece of research and why it's important. Remind assessors without overdoing it about your performance and achievements relative to the opportunities you've had for research, impact, mentoring, leadership, etc. Thank you. I think that's my last slide. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Anyone has any questions? Well, we will have a final discussion session, but yeah, if anyone have any immediate question, feel free to ask. If not, we do have questions that have already sent and some questions from last event to ask at the end. So we can move on to our second speaker, Mark, and pass it to him to introduce.
It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Mark Gillis. Professor Mark Gillis is a clinician scientist and the Director of Research at SSI Institute, the University of Sydney. He is the head of the Macular Research Group. The group's clinical research unit has conducted several major investigator-initiated randomized clinical trials, including the first on intravitreal injection for any ophthalmic disease. The Macular Research Group's Observational Studies Unit has developed internet-based software known as the Fight Retinal Blindness Project to track the outcomes of treatment of macular disease. Mark's lab has interest in retinal metabolism, fibrosis, and therapeutics. Mark was a founder member and for many years the chair of the Scientific Executive Committee, extensively with the global offices of the major ophthalmic pharma companies. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Himal. Someone's got to unshare while I start. Someone's. Oh, that's not good. Sorry. Hello. Now I'm sharing. Okay. So I put together a presentation, but we have some discussion later on an investigative grant, HMRC investigative grants. But I'd like just to say something on the NHMRC opportunities. So you have to read very carefully and have a look at them very carefully at the language that they're using and what the success rate is. So it's definitely listed quite a few grants there. One scheme, the development scheme, is by far the most successful scheme. I've been on that panel twice, and their success rate is nearly 40 to 50%. They don't get very many applications, but you just have to make sure that you have got the right scheme. So the one we're looking at the moment is on data infrastructure and opportunity, blah, blah, blah. This is for FRB. This is something that we think fits us very well. So if you have a look here, you have to look at the language that they use. So they talk about we have to develop technologies to address areas of unmet medical need. And they have a definition here. Here's the unmet medical need. It's when Australians have a serious health condition for which there are no satisfactory options for prevention, diagnosis, early detection, or treatment. Or it might be there's been no or little progress. So that is exactly what they're looking for. And unless you are doing something towards this, then you're not going to get it up. So if we have a look at what I put together here, this is my grant that got up. There's, as you know, there are 5 levels here, and pretty much anyone throughout their career can go for this. So the leadership level 3 is the top one, and the earliest one is, I had it on, leadership level 1. So leadership level 1 is typically 0 to 5 years post PhD. Leadership level, this is level 3. This is a full leadership grant for senior people like old people like myself. And these people typically 20 years post PhD or equivalent. And what they're looking for is significant original contributions of major importance with a positive impact on health and medical research or any of these things, health system, economy, or the health of your population. You need to be leading a major independent research program with national, international collaborators. Need international, national contributions of through leadership in your discipline. It can be either the university, or it can be your department, or it can be, like if you're an ophthalmologist, it can be the college, or it could be Australian Society for Medical Research is a common one to get involved with. You need to be had high degree research students, and you have to have these, they look for other leadership roles within your organisation or NHMRC panels. So for a younger person though, level 1, don't know why it's doing that, you have to have made an original contribution in your area. So that should be, you should be able to establish that through your publications. You have to be shown that you've contributed to the conception of research projects, and you have to make some contribution within your region, like nationally, not necessarily internationally, would be more than you need for this, this opportunity. You may have some limited supervision, such as a co-supervisor, and a lot of people perform co-supervision in fact, but they're not put down as the official sort of co-supervisor of these students. So it's helpful to have that, you know, formalized through the university, and they want you to be making some contributions within the university or your department as possible, and you'll be sort of under the mentorship of senior researchers. Now, this is an important, this is what all NHMRC people on the panels, they have this plastered all over the place, because these are the category descriptors. And this is how they rate everything. So what they will do, they'll come to your grant and they'll say, okay, this aspect of your grant, how does the people score? And everyone gives up their individual score between 1 and 7. So 7 is exceptional. That is like 1 in 100. That's like you rarely see these grants, but they're almost perfect. 6 is outstanding. So you might say that is the top 1 in 10 of grants you see. So it's outstanding. It's clearly better than most of the grants that you're looking at. And then above that is excellent, below that is excellent, which is a 5. So you've got to be getting 5s and 6s to get the NHMRC grants. You can be very good, which is probably, you know, 80% of the grants, but it's not going to get you into the mid 5s, which is where the ideas grants cutoff was this year. And then obviously, even as good, you know, you're way down the list there. So you need to be, that is the answer. How do you get these grants? You have to be outstanding. It really is the only way to get there. You've got to be the top 10%. That's what they're looking for. Don't forget that they take this very seriously, and they're constantly directed to take this very seriously. Circumstances relative to opportunity. So if you have been off for personal reasons, or for whatever other reasons, or if you only work in research like 60% of the time or the 40% of the time, you definitely have to state all that. And they have to take that seriously into account. So this is what I wrote, that, you know, I only do 60% of my time on research, 40% of my time is doing on stuff that's non-research. So they'll mark you up quite strongly as a result of that, if you can say something like this. It's very important to put that out. All right, so let's get into the gist of what we said. So if we come to the research, how they do the assessment criteria for these grants, at every level, the investigative grant, it's 70% on the track record relative to opportunity. Don't forget, they're always saying that. And it is 30% on the knowledge gain, which is defined here, as you can see, the quality of the proposed research. This is the actual 9-page research plan that you put up. The significance of the knowledge gain, we might be able to go into that. So you've got the theoretical concepts, the hypothesis. It's very important to put a hypothesis in. If you can, many applications go up without a hypothesis, and that's a weakness. The research design they'll be looking at, we can have a look at that in a bit more detail. The robustness, the extent to which the research will contribute to the research area and the health outcomes. Basically, they're asking here, can these guys do it? And what if they can do it? Can they do it? Are they capable? And if they can do it, is it significant? That's what they're asking. But then for the investigative grants, most of it is track record, relative opportunity. Publications is fairly clear. Research impact and leadership are still very significant, and it's not so clear how to answer those questions. So I might just show you what I said to give you any idea. So in the publications here, I said although they just asked for the top 5, they're interested in what you've done for the last 10 years. So it's just as well to put in the total of publications you've got in the last 10 years. You might highlight a couple of major journals you've been lucky enough to get into a couple of major journals and your citations. And here I put in a case report. I put in something on lab science. I put in something on a clinical trial. I put something on the registries, fight retinal blindness. And then I put in, this is probably the best paper. I was only a minor author on this, but that was a major international collaboration. So this asks for many of the things that we went over, answers many of the things we went over before. So for the research impact, these are specific questions that they ask you, the reach and significance of the research impact. So I answered this, and there are 4 subheadings here: knowledge, economic, health, and social. So under knowledge, I said the bench to bedside approach that we have in the lab, and I talked again about the publications and the invited presentations. For the economic research and research impact, I talked about the contacts I have with pharma, because clinicians get to sit on advisory boards and they seem pretty boring, but NHMRC takes them quite seriously, advisory boards. Sorry, this is jumping around so much. And then I talked particularly about the significance of the findings from the disease registries, because these are able to show, that in Australia, the injections were actually going quite well for macular degeneration, which can be, presented as one of the commonest causes of blindness. In terms of the health research impact, I talked about the clinical trials that we do, run a clinical trials unit, and particularly we've done a couple of our own studies, some on steroids and some on photobiomodulation. I actually forgot to put the social bit in there. I'm not sure if this is the right way to answer it, but we got the grant in the end. I don't know why I kept on getting called. Sorry, can I call you back? Send me a message. I'm just in the middle of a meeting. Then you have to say your research program's contribution to the research impact. So on the clinical impact, I said we've done work on steroids and registries, as I said, and some of this was quite repetitive with the previous section. And the scientific impact, I was able to talk about what we've done in the lab on retinal metabolism, Moore cells and macular explants. And then my contribution to the research program, I said I conceived, funded and led all this. And I talked again about the links with pharma, the advisory board, and some stuff we did with steroids. And then I put in a section in this here on community engagement. They love community engagement. So we send around a newsletter every 6 months, and we get quite a bit of community support out of that. We've been doing that for 10 years. So I put that in there. But if you have anything to say on community engagement, that's where you can apparently put it. Then in the leadership, there's 4 categories. They want to know about research mentoring. So that's fairly straightforward. Obviously, you're doing high degree research students. Ophthalmologists can also talk about ophthalmology training, but that doesn't carry much weight. We, for some reason, specialist training programs. International research fellows, we've had a few of those and they sound quite good. Just people who come from overseas to do a bit of time here, you call them international research fellows. And generally they've gone back, and a bit of luck, they've got a good position back there, and you can say what they were, like professor or something back in some French university. And then you talk about mentoring your colleagues. That's not necessarily a formal arrangement, but everyone does it. And that actually goes quite well here. So you guys who are organising this meeting, this is where you would put this in, the ECR research meeting. Then you've got to talk about your research policy, professional development. And so I just talked about invited speaker, invitations to speak here, and then any committees that you're on. The Ophthalmic Research Institute of Australia is one. They have a research committee. Stephanie Watson is the chair of that. You might like to write to her and see if there's any positions available there. There's also, as I said, the Australian Society of Medical Researchers, an organisation you can get involved with. ISA is going to be in Australia. They'll have a meeting in Australia next year, which means they'll have the business meetings there, and you can attend the business meetings at ISA and try to get on one of the committees there. That carries quite a bit of weight. It's an international organisation. You can also do that with ARVO, but it's more competitive. And then I was an editor for a journal for a while. You can put in the papers that you might put them in there. Institutional leadership, well, we know what that is. It's management. I've been on the management committee. Established a medical research group, and then the weekly meetings that you may be involved in, and then again the research programs and team leadership. Then you talk about your funding and you establish these sorts of things. Okay, so then you've got the knowledge gain, the research proposal. So we had 3 areas of research. We had the registries that we put the whole lot in. The registries, the clinical trials, and the lab. And for each one, we put in the rationale, the aims, and the methods. And there's a hypothesis on the first page, but for each individual activity, the rationale, aims, expressive, expected outcome. And then if you have any other support for this. And then they want you to list what essential support that you have. So this is an opportunity to say where you're getting other support from. And we have good collaboration where we get macular tissue from the Lions Eye Bank, national, international collaborators on the MacTel project. We get support from industry and clinical trials, and support from the community for our newsletter. And then you talk about the importance of the problem, planned outcome, potential significance, and you talk about the knowledge gain in the 3 areas that we have there. Now, when it comes to the actual NHMRC application, I think it's helpful to have the first page is what many people on the panel will read, that and nothing else. So you've got to have some sort of an introduction, and Stephanie went into that quite pretty well, I thought, about the significance of what's going on here. And then we like to put a diagram in, which I'll go to that in a moment. And then, but all this is in one page, because what a lot of panel members do, they're often assigned, they might have 60 grants to go through, but they're only assigned to 15. So for the other 45, they'll just read this, if you're lucky. Some of them, they only read the abstract, but a lot of people will just read that, but they're all scoring on your grant. So if we get to, so basically this is the title, Fighting Retinal Blindness, Learn from the Past, Improve the Present, Support the Future of Treatment for Macular Disease. So we talked about the basic research unit, and this is what we do for the lab research, then clinical research on mainly diabetic macular edema, macular degeneration, MacTel, and then the registries, outcome of long-term treatments. We're not necessarily following the treatments that we've developed in the lab, although with steroids we actually do, but the other ones that hasn't got that far. But it looks quite nice and it hangs all together. If you put it in a diagram like that, it's easily understandable. And then finally, this is their comments on the assessment for the experimental design. This is exactly what they want to know about in the 30% when you're talking about, you know, what you're actually going to do. So they'll be looking at how rigorous were the previous experimental designs that form the basis for this proposal. So you put out what you've already done. There's got to be some preliminary data. And ideally, if everything goes perfectly and all goes well, you get the preliminary data in some sort of scheme that it's more likely to get the money from, such as, again, the Ophthalmic Research Institute of Australia. It is one advantage we have in vision research, there is this scheme that has about a 30% success rate. But you can realistically get a year's funding for a research assistant here, maybe not full-time, but part-time, which may give you enough preliminary data to base an NHMRC application on. They need to know the techniques. And then they want to know things like this. This is what they say. But if you're doing lab research, obviously, it'll be different. It won't be a blinding, or we like to say masking rather than blinding in clinical trials. But this is mainly for clinical trials, for masking, for randomization and the control groups. But if it's a laboratory research project, it'll be this level of detail on, you know, how you choose the groups, size and power calculations. I'd like to see those. They want to have a look at what the variables are and, you know, other potential confounders. And that's pretty much what I put together. But unless there is any questions on that, I had the list of questions that Himmel had. Unless, do you have the list of questions that you had for? This is it here. Don't you want to bring up any discussion now? Or do you want to go for these questions now, or what?
Yeah. So if anyone has any direct question to Mark, could ask now, or we will go into a common question for both Mark and Stephanie. Okay, there is one. So in the chat, great to learn the writing tips and assessment criteria for winning a grant by an early and mid-career researcher. On what merits or criteria the submitted proposals are evaluated? What are the tips to get successful outcome focusing on the evaluators' criteria perspectives? What makes outstanding or excellent proposals? It's quite a lot of questions there. I guess this is addressed to both Mark and Stephanie.
All right. Well, can I just say that what makes an outstanding application? Outstanding application is something which has clearly significant. So there's a question here, how can you compete with researchers in other hot research areas such as cancer, diabetes, and COVID? These are currently hot areas, but vision has been a hot area in the past. And in many places around the world, including the United States, vision is still a hot topic. It's just that we've been overtaken by a lot of specialties here in Australia. Everyone's trying to push their own specialty forward. We've fallen off the list. But there are some significant there are significant ophthalmic conditions that people know about, which is in our field is macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. Everyone on the panel has heard of those. They haven't heard very much of glaucoma, but you can make your case. And the other thing you can do here is there's one of them was presented this morning at our meeting at 7:45 about people would rather get cancer than go blind. So you can quote some of those things. But basically, if you clearly push something out as an area where people are going blind and the treatments, for example, and the treatments are substandard, and you've got some treatment which is better or some approach which is better, then it's not necessarily a disadvantage. The reason it's a disadvantage is because there's not very many vision researchers on the panels. So ideally, senior people such as myself will go on panels so that they can push up the eye grants. That's how it works. I've done 6, I haven't done any for a while, but you should encourage, you know, the older people to, if you can, to go, people who can do it, to go on the panels, because really it's having the vision researchers on the panels that I think gets us our grants. What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think it's also about making that why, you know, sound important. So if you do have a neuroscientist reading it, that you've, you know, made the point about how important it is in writing clearly, so it's not overly technical. And, you know, I think also it is, I mean, when I was, I've been on the NHMRC panels as an observer and as an assistant chair, which is something you can do early on in your in your career, before you can get to being on the panels. And it's a good stepping stone and a good way to see how grants are reviewed.
So I guess we need someone in the panel. So maybe when writing the grants, I know the NHMRC grant goes through different pages. The first page is to select your area. So that's probably quite important that you select the right area, therefore it goes to the right panel that probably can weight your application higher. Would that make sense? Yes, any other questions?
There's a question here on any advice for researching focused on public health or epidemiology. No, you're not at a disadvantage. There's actually a public health panel, and it's quite a high standard. But you have to realize, public health is at a very high standard. So if you want to be public health, if you want it to be like an outstanding application in public health, you might be looking at Mendelian randomization, although some of these, cutting edge things that are just coming out now. But you have to be, top 10%. It's a big ask. You've got to stand out. But there's nothing wrong with public health or epidemiology, but you need to get your hand on a very good data set as well. That's the other thing, the quality of the data set you're dealing with. I'm not sure how good the data sets in epidemiology are, but part of it's going to be the quality of your data set.
Thank you.
As an XDR researcher, would you advise applying to any opportunities or being selective? You have to be selective about this. I've seen some people just fail in research because they literally spent all their time writing grant applications, which didn't work. And in the end, you're forced out because you don't have any data after a while. So you have to be selective, and you have to spend no more than 30%, 20 or 30% of your time on writing grants. Grant administration, if you get the money, doesn't take that long. It's mainly getting the grant that takes a lot. That's a lot of effort.
And one thing I say with the things like the investigative grants, like often you have to do it for more than 1 year. The first year, particularly now with all the new fields that are in there relating to impact. And so, if you have spent a lot of time putting together a grant for something, then it is good to look and see what else it might be suitable for. If you lack pilot data, then you need to probably start with something smaller like an ORA grant to try to get some pilot data, or a local grant to get the pilot data. So look, there's no strict rule on which grant to apply for. It really depends on what sort of project you have and what data you have to support it, and how far along your track record is.
There are some other schemes that are easy to get money out of. Ramachotti is another one.
Yeah, I can type it in because I think that's a grant start to become quite good. Ramachotti grant.
Now, another thing that you can do to get your first grant is to join a large collaborative network and go up as CIC or CID. So you don't have to be CIA. For CIA, you've got to have, it's all got to be perfect or pretty close to perfect. But if you can, the wider your collaborative networks, the more likely you are to get on a major grant. So if you can work on developing collaborative networks, and so if you have something that you can provide, a unique assay or something like that, a large group is going to benefit from, then that's one way to start getting some money from NHMRC.
The only caveat on that is at the moment there are restrictions on how many of these grants you can hold, and so if somebody just puts you on one of the NHMRC ideas grants and you're not really having much of a role, that may preclude you from applying for your own grants at some point. And if that grant runs for 3 years, and that person can even extend that grant for another year. So you do need to consider it. In the past, we didn't have to think about that, and you could sort of widely go on different grants, but now it does actually have an impact. And there is a formula on the NHMRC or the grant administration team that can help you figure out if you've already got grants, whether you can actually apply for another one.
Yeah.
Don't be part of a collaborative network where they're just putting you on for your name. So sometimes people put on clinicians because they need a clinician, but they're otherwise not involved in the project. That's a cynical thing to do. You don't want to be involved with those people. You've got to have a proper, contribution so that you will get on the papers. You'll be an author of the papers that come out.
So if we go through the question list, the second question is how much detailed or extensive revision can ECRs expect from the supervisors while they, for their grant writing? Any comments?
Yeah, generally you would expect the supervisor to be fairly helpful with that, because if you get the funding, that's funding for the group. But there's no rules. It's like a PhD supervisor. Some of them are lazy and some of them are really good. But you'd expect them to put a lot of effort into revising it for you. They may not come up with your project.
And how many revisions, just follow on that question, how many revisions that both of your grant have been gone through? Would you mind to share that? And who do you share to review your grant?
Oh, it depends what grant it is. I mean, some grants you've got quite a fully formed idea that you've worked on. So there's no strict rule around how many revisions that a grant should have. Look, if you're worried if it's too technical, it's good to give it to somebody else, maybe Paul Martin or somebody like that that's not familiar at all with what you're doing. And he'll look at it and say, well, that's easy to understand, or I can't, so it doesn't have to be somebody in your area if you just want them to overview it and see if it's making sense.
And then the third question on the list is, can you share your experience of examples of what went wrong and how did you fix it?
Yeah, not quite sure what that means. You generally don't know it's gone wrong until you don't get the grant, which is 9 months later.
Yeah, look, and sometimes, it's very competitive. So sometimes it might be that, you get 5.7 and the cutoff is 5.8. So, it's not that there were huge errors that you've done. So maybe it's just that you need to, just increase your track record and go back again. Yeah.
And then,
so back to this thing about, the last question about the opportunity being selected for the grant. Sometimes if you're not there, it's best just to not apply for it all and just continue working in the lab to generate, the background data that you need. Just because you push to apply for grants, but if there's really if you're not there, then it's a very large waste of time. It takes a couple of months to put an HMRC grant together, as you know. It's not worth doing it unless you're fairly confident that you've got what you need. And if you haven't got what you need, you may as well just keep working on generating data and going up at the next opportunity.
So on that, how would ECR knows if they are up there or not yet? What sort of ballpark they're looking at? So for example, HMRC Investigator Grant for an ECR, what sort of publications would you think that they had to at least reach in order to be competitive? Is there a kind of a threshold? No,
there's not a number. It's more the significance of the publications. You might only have one. If it was.
Mark showed those rating scales before that they use, and so you can apply them to at any stage. You can apply the NHMRC grading scales, the 0 to 7 or whatever it is. And if you go to the NHMA website, there'll be a description of that. Like, so very good might be that you have a national presence, but you don't have an international one, or something like that. So you can sort of figure out some of your standing from looking through those category descriptors.
Yeah, there is categories descriptors on publications. You can have a look. You need to read the documentation associated with each grant very carefully.
Yeah. So the next question is asking, how do I identify or develop a good project topic?
Well, one thing is you've got to be passionate about it, because research is hard enough to make progress in. So you've got to be really turned on and passionate by the whole thing. That's a personal thing, I think. You don't want to go and do things that you're not good at or because you think they're more significant. I mean, you wouldn't change to work in the macular degeneration without knowing anything about it because you think it's going to be a more significant area. You probably do want to stay out of things that are not, you want to try not start in things that are not highly significant. Like a friend of mine from Melbourne had a career in corneal, SCC, squamous cell carcinoma. But he never got marked highly insignificant, so he failed ultimately. He wasn't able to develop that. So you don't want something that is a very uncommon or rare disease. But even with uncommon or rare diseases, if there was no other treatment for it, and it affected Australians, and you had a really exciting discovery, you couldn't get that up.
What about you, Stephanie? Any suggestions on developing a good project?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying before is, like when you say if you've done a paper or a bit of research in an area and then you get to that, end of the paper and you're writing in your session, this is the future directions, or you read another paper that a researcher is working on in your area that says these are the future directions, then that can be inspiring to find something that you might, want to work on. Yeah, the other thing is, is conferences. Often I get inspired when I go to conferences and you hear the sort of the presentations and hear the work that other people are doing. And you think, oh, well, we've got a great, expertise in that area or a good data set for that. Yeah, and always talk to your supervisor. The supervisor's probably got quite a few ideas as well that they might be able to help you with and steer you in the right direction.
Great. So the next two questions are actually quite similar, so I'll probably combine them to one. And it's actually, I think the questions in the chat, so kind of connected. But basically, just when you review grants, what are the factors that indicate to you that it may be a good application, and what are the factors that indicated to you that it's not going to be a good application?
Well, I think readability is, I've mentioned that, is high up there. So, it's got to be easy to understand and comprehend. Just having lots of complex scientific diagrams in, even though it might look impressive, it doesn't necessarily make the grant better. You've got to have key diagrams or key bits of information that enable you to create the picture. Having pilot data is helpful, and the track record explained appropriately, which is, pointing out what the significance of the things are. So, like Arvo, if you get a thing from Arvo, like say you get given an award, and, say the whatever medal, if that medal's given out to 100 people, who really cares about that medal? Like, whereas if that medal's only given to one person and it's selected on merit, then in saying that you've got that medal or received that medal, you would say, was the only person to receive the blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of really telling the story better. Yeah. And, some of it might seem obvious, but it's important to sort of point out the achievements and the significance.
Great. And we have a question on the chat. How to access to collaborator network, especially for one who does not have great track record. How do I find right collaborators? Any useful tips to start?
You have to have an approach or a technique or something like that that nobody else has, that you've developed, and then people want to use this. So, for us, we've had access to human tissue, which has been a benefit for us in the MacTel project, which is a big international collaboration of laboratory scientists, but none of them can get human tissue. So a lot of the hypotheses they're working on in mouse tissue on retinal metabolism, we're able to do that in human tissue, and they're otherwise unable to do that. So it's a very solid collaboration, and we're an integral part of that.
Yep, I'm aware of the time that it's almost 5:30, 1 minute, and Mark has to leave at 5:30. So I would like to take the final minute so that we can take a photo together. If people don't mind to turn on their camera, you can stay not turning on, but if you can turn it on, that'll be good. And Maria will take a screenshot of everyone.
We got it?
Have we?
Yes.
We got everyone?
Yep, we got everyone.
Okay, that's great. Yes, I wouldn't hold everyone for too long, but yeah, we do still have a few more seconds. So if anyone has anything to say. Okay, cool. So it's now 5:30, and thank you again for Mark and Stephanie to share the valuable insights on writing a good to write a good grant. We're going to post a survey link on the chat. So if you could take on the survey link and give us some feedback, it will help us improve organizing events for all the ECRs. And that's it. And if any of you are a part of a SafeSci but not yet subscribed to our ECR mailing list, feel free to contact me, Hemo or Maria to subscribe to the mailing list. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Stephanie. Thank you, Mark. And
thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Very
Bye.
useful. Bye-bye.